teachers. What are the dumbest answers you've received from students on tests or exams? I had one professor at university whom I absolutely hated. When I took my final exam with him, instead of using regular numbers, I decided to use Roman numerals. It was challenging, but I managed. Soon after the exam, he sent me an email saying he refused to grade my work. I forwarded his email to the dean, who responded that technically Roman numerals still constitute a viable form of numeration. The professor had to review my work. I ended up with an A. Oh, I have a great story about one of my students. Let me start with a clarification. In our country, if 70% of the class fails a test, everyone has to retake it. The highest score from either attempt counts. Once, everyone failed the test except for one guy who scored perfectly. But naturally, he couldn't improve his grade on the retake. So instead of answers, he wrote down a cheesecake recipe. I didn't mind, made the cheesecake, and it was simply amazing. Which country is this? I don't know where the author is from, but we had a similar rule in Germany, though it changed about 5 years ago. That reminds me of one of my classmates. When the teacher marked his answer as incorrect, we complained to have his decision reversed. Question: can you explain the consequences of the German invasion of the Netherlands in 1940? Answer: no. Technically, yes would have been correct too. It was just a badly worded question by the teacher. I was giving a biology exam on frogs and amphibians. Question: name several ways to save frogs from extinction. Answer: ban all French restaurants nationwide. Perhaps not the most outstanding or effective way to protect frogs, but technically, it was correct. I teach preschoolers, specifically 2-year-olds. Sometimes I give them picture cards and ask what's on them. Once, there was a card with a gallon of milk. I asked, where does milk come from? Immediately, one of my favorites shouted, "Mommy!" Milk comes from mommies. Technically, he wasn't wrong. During an astronomy lecture, our professor asked the class how many stars are in our galaxy. No one raised their hand, so he randomly picked someone and asked for an answer. After some thought, the person said, probably at least a couple dozen, right? The teacher sighed sadly and said, well, yes indeed. Question: how do you feel about premarital relations? Answer: I wouldn't buy a car without test driving it. Not a teacher, but once I completely forgot to prepare for a test. I left almost all answers blank. The last question was the only one I answered. It asked, what is a haiku? Please write a definition and provide an example. My haiku was, I failed this test hard, should have studied much better. Now I hate myself. My teacher wrote, not bad, and gave me full marks for that question. After that, I started preparing properly for the rest of the year. Haiku is the most overrated crap in literary history. I remember when we studied haiku, I said, so what? Is that it? Last class, you promised us something grand, but this is nowhere near grand. My mom used to be a teacher. Once, she was testing 7th graders on their geography knowledge and asked, which island was considered the largest before the discovery of Australia? One kid replied, trick question, Australia doesn't exist. Hope you're Australian. When I was in 1st grade, the teacher asked, why does everyone love George Washington? One classmate answered, because thanks to him, we have days off. 3rd grade, I asked students to write definitions for several words. One of the words was parents. One student's definition was adults who have you. Surprisingly deep answer for a 3rd grader. Not a teacher, but I conduct driving tests. I asked, what penalty is due if you don't stop when the police signal you to? The student replied, if you drive fast enough, there's no penalty. I had a student who submitted code to me with profane comments. I had to have a serious conversation with him about professionalism. Little did he know, the hell of my bachelor's thesis code? During a Japanese exam, instead of answering, one student wrote, "I know nothing, sorry. I didn't study. I've disgraced my entire family and my cow," and drew the saddest cow imaginable. Edit. In case you're not familiar, the family and cow reference is from Mulan, though Mulan was Chinese. Edit 2. There was also an assignment where they had to rewrite Japanese numerals with Arabic numerals, like 1, 2, 3. One genius wrote the entire assignment in Roman numerals. At first, I laughed, but then I wanted to kill him. Well, since the goal of the assignment was to demonstrate understanding of Japanese numerals, he technically did complete it, albeit in a ridiculously wrong way. I remember we had a test on Chinese characters, where students had to write a definition for the character 4. It's a proverb that roughly translates to, "Even a school dog can learn to read and write in 3 years." But one student translated it as, "If you haven't figured something out in 3 years, you're dumber than a dog." Maybe he did it on purpose. I teach chemistry at university. Students were given an essay question. Can't recall the exact topic. Anyway, one student, who had no clue about the subject, instead of leaving it blank, wrote a detailed story about a lonely dragon who couldn't make friends. The other animals felt sorry for him, but the problem was that whenever the dragon was happy, he accidentally burned everything around him. This whole story took him 3 or 4 pages. Then abruptly, he tried to answer the actual question. I still wonder if the dragon eventually found friends. Poor thing. I hope he didn't hurt anyone. How did you grade his work? Did you deduct points for the story? I only assessed what related to the assignment. His story didn't affect his grade. I teach physics and biology. The funniest answer. Me. Name any source of protein. Student. Platypus. The dumbest answer. Me. Why do we see lightning before we hear it? Student. Because sound travels slower than noise. My favorite answer in over 20 years of teaching. Question. In what year did the American Revolution begin? Answer. In France. I still can't understand what was going on in his head. I didn't even dare ask him to explain. I teach English in China. We're studying professions. I asked the class, "What profession do you want to be?" A model student's answer, completely serious. "I want to be a potato." I teach at a school where students use iPads. All our work is done digitally. So on one test, a student inserted an emoji of a pizza instead of an answer. I don't even remember the question anymore, but I remember the answer well. Not a teacher, but in 7th grade, we had a grammar test. There were 10 questions, each worth 3 points. I failed all the questions and forgot to sign my paper. I got -3 out of 30. I'm not a teacher, but I know a guy who misspelled his own name on an exam. Here's an example of our dumb answers from school, like a meme. Anyway, we used to answer every question we didn't know with either 42, 6, or Jesus. Once we had a physics quiz I didn't prepare for, where I decided to write those 3 answers everywhere. The funny thing is, on one question I answered almost correctly, where I wrote 42, the answer was 43 inches, so I got 1 point for it. In the end, my grade was just above the minimum. Reply, give award share report. Save intoxicated browsing 702 points 3 months ago. Once I also wrote Jesus as an answer on a physics quiz. When I got my paper back, it said, "I'll accept this answer, once and for the last time." Question. Who is known as the founding father of America? Answer. George Walker Bush. He got the George part right. So, can we give him 1/3 of a point? One of my teachers once told us that during a 12th grade exam, instead of an essay, one of her students wrote, "I don't understand this topic, but here's a bird for you." and then drew a really amazing bird. Former teacher here. Honestly, that's a working strategy. We had specific grading rules, and by those rules, her student would have gotten AD or 51%. If he had turned in a blank sheet, he would have gotten 0%. Is it dumb? Yes, but those were the rules. So draw those birds, kids. You never know when it will come in handy. My dad once told me that one of his students complained that they hadn't covered what was on the test. The question was, can you get pregnant from a handshake? It was the first year of medical school. This sounds like a trick question. Like, it can't be that simple. There must be some hidden answer. Maybe it's still possible to get pregnant under some crazy circumstances? Once during an exam, my student raised his hand to ask a question. His hand was completely covered in formulas. I'm not a professor, but I've had to grade exam papers before. I've seen people draw in their answers, write jokes in them, and beg the graders to give them a passing grade. Thanks to these antics, grading those papers for 12 hours a day wasn't as exhausting. Once someone drew a dinosaur, then tried to erase it. Honestly, it looked like they had a really bad eraser. The guy almost rubbed the paper to dust, trying to erase the traces of that horribly drawn dinosaur. Another time, someone wrote a joke in very tiny font. There were also cases where people tried to butter me up, like, "Snooge, you're so awesome. I'd gladly bake you a cake. By the way, could you give me a passing grade?" Edited. By the way, info for everyone in college right now. Sometimes all this crap actually works. If you manage to sweet-talk the grader, they might cut you some slack. What are the most insensitive words you've ever been told? Subscribe to the channel, like it, and leave a comment. This will greatly help the development of the channel. Thank you. In my teenage years, I had severe depression, which one night resulted in a big fight with my mother, ending with me taking almost a ton of pills. When I tearfully told her I needed help, she burst into tears and replied, "People will think I'm a bad mother." I dated a girl who sometimes said, "The girls and I are going out. Hope I find someone better than you." I think it was said half-jokingly, but in the end, we didn't work out. Fucking piece of shit, I hope you die. While I was suicidal and undergoing therapy, which she knew. Stop mourning her. Millions of people die of cancer every day. Do you cry for them too? No? Then shut up. What do you want from me? That evening, I told my boyfriend that my best friend had died after a 3-year battle with cancer. After those words, I left him, although I should have done it much earlier. "Better if you died," said my ex, with whom I had been dating for 2 years, the day after my clinical death. "Are you done with PMS?" After my grandfather's death. "I'm a guy." I immediately blocked her. Not the worst case in my life, but it still hurts. This happened the day after my grandmother died, when I was in 5th grade. I told the jerk math teacher that I didn't do my homework because I cried all night and tried to process the news, and he interrupted me with the words, "Yes, I know, your father wrote to me. But that's no excuse for not doing your homework." The whole class silently listened to his lecture that homework is more important than the loss of a family member. I remember barely holding back from punching his ugly face. After my long-awaited pregnancy ended in a miscarriage, a friend announced that she was glad because now I could go to bars with her again. In college, I was assaulted by a coach. 10 years later, I met a guy from my college. He asked for my phone number. I refused. No wonder the coach raped you, frigid bitch. I have to admit, whatever you're doing, it's working. You look great. Thanks, Mom. I just told you about my eating disorder, but yeah, at least I was skinny. Are you still here? The fetus died a few hours ago. Words of the obstetrician at St. Bernardine's Hospital, 1972. After giving birth, the baby was taken away, and I was placed in a storage room converted into a hospital ward. My daughter died 12 hours later, but no one even thought to inform me. I lay drugged, sleepy, in a fake ward. He forgot, then said he could have saved her, but it wasn't worth his time and money. I won a prestigious National Science Foundation scholarship, and my professor said, "We knew you'd get it. After all, you're a girl." I don't have it as bad as many, but still, I'm a nurse. One day I heard from a patient's relative, "Couldn't get into university, so you became just a nurse?" I have 3 houses, bitch, and you have nothing. Your father doesn't love you. I was 12 years old when I heard this from my dad's girlfriend. Luckily, I recorded that conversation and sent it to my dad. She's no longer alive. What actually happened? We never liked each other and constantly fought over small things. My dad chalked it up to me not accepting his new girlfriend because she was his first partner after my mom. He didn't believe any of the stories I told him or took her side. After I showed him the recording, he looked very worried and probably felt guilty. He immediately made her pack her things and leave. Now we are very close, and we have a trusting relationship. Later, he met a new woman, a childhood friend, and they'd been married for some time. At first, I thought she was rude, but I was just afraid she'd be like the former one. Now we get along well, and I often visit them. My brother died when I was in 7th grade, and after I didn't go to school for 2 weeks, my parents decided it was time for me to go back, so I wouldn't fall behind. On the first day during the 3rd lesson, girls started bullying me, and after I bravely stood up to them, one of them shouted, "At least my brother didn't die." I couldn't stand it, burst into tears, and ran away. My friends later began to avenge me in various ways, but I didn't know about it until the school psychologist told me. She was never punished, but her parents were told about the incident. Honestly, her life, as far as I know, became pretty shitty. No one wanted to be friends with her, and she ended up graduating a year early to leave our town. I'm sure she regrets her words, but I can't help feeling a sense of justice. When I was little, I was told that adoptive parents don't love their children as much as their biological ones. Now, I laugh about it, but at the time it hurt. I worried because I was adopted. You know, that phrase never made sense to me. You were literally chosen to live with them as their child. That's much more important than just being born, as there are always accidental, unwanted children or biological children who are treated horribly. Who the hell says that to a child? Like, hey, I need to make sure this kid knows their parents don't love them 100%. What if they don't know? I need to tell them. Why? When I was in school, we were very poor. My mom raised me alone, and I had only one pair of jeans, which I wore every day. There were 2 tiny holes on the jeans that I got climbing over a fence. One day, in drama class, the teacher randomly paired us for a mini play. I got partnered with a very handsome guy, not a popular bully, but a regular nice guy who was friends with everyone. When we sat down to work, he asked, "Hey, can I ask you a question? Why do you wear the same pants every day?" I replied, blushing, "Because these are my only pants." The expression on his face was horrific, like his world was collapsing before his eyes. I realized he felt terrible for asking, and I felt terrible because I naively believed no one noticed I wore the same jeans every day. I teared up writing this, even though it happened 30 years ago. My sons, 12 and 16, saw this, and we talked a bit about being careful with our words. Then, my younger son started hugging me and crying, which made me completely fall apart. But suddenly, we remembered that boy, who probably still feels terrible about what he said, and we laughed. Hey, tactless boy, from Crescent Heights School in 1983. I forgive you. In my residential complex, there is one very wealthy family. They bought 2 apartments and made one out of them, and a family that can barely make ends meet. We kids hang out together. The girl from the poor family always wears the same shirt for the same reason you did. One day we were talking about clothes, and someone asked her, "Why do you always wear the same thing?" She teared up and replied, "I have nothing else." We shut up and changed the subject. A month later, it was Christmas, and that family received an anonymous package, a huge box of beautiful clothes for the girl and everyone else. And not just any mass market stuff, but Armani, Marks, and Spencer, we live in Hong Kong, G2000, and so on. My boss, upon learning that my father was a pastor, said, "All priests are perverts. He cheated on your mother, you just don't know about it." That same day, I quit. On the first day I returned to work after my daughter's death, I made a silly mistake. My annoyed colleague said, "Damn, good thing your genes are no longer polluting the gene pool. How many years did you get for murder? Because that jerk really deserved to be killed. I'm sure no judge on earth would have found you guilty. Otherwise, Jesus Christ himself would have appeared in the courtroom." Once I lived with a man who was very proud of how much he worked. One day, he shamed me for being lazy because I did nothing all day, which of course was true, except for the 3 days a week I went for chemotherapy at the oncology center. The rest of the time, I just lay around. When I told my mom I finally had a girlfriend, her reaction was quite standard. Be very careful with any girl who shows interest in you. What can you offer her? You have almost nothing. Wow, thanks mom. Of course, the girl only wants my kidneys. By the way, I love my mom. She followed a mistaken strategy of overprotecting her inexperienced younger son. Also, for the record, I do have something to offer, and I am married to a hot girl who isn't trying to sell my kidneys on the black market. Well, as far as I know. My boss didn't give me time off for my aunt's funeral. Since she was technically my second cousin, she wasn't a close enough relative to miss the annual training day, which I had attended for 2 years in a row and learned nothing new. I already didn't like my boss, but after that, my opinion of her plummeted. I always find it funny when employers try to deny time off. I notify them not to get permission, but so they can plan for my absence. I'm gonna take that day off anyway. Screw them. At every job I've been at, they would have escorted me out for that. After being expelled from school, I struggled to maintain contact with a friend. One day, I apparently annoyed him, and he wrote back, "God, I don't care if you're lonely. It's not my problem. Leave me alone." So I did, and I had the best 2 months of my life. Then he decided he needed me, came back and begged to renew our friendship, to which I replied, "God, I don't care if you're lonely. It's not my problem. Leave me alone." Maybe it was a bit childish, but it was still the most satisfying moment of my non-romantic life. My mom recently died. I have a jerk colleague who constantly comes to work high and does nothing. Over the weekend, he got too high to work, so I essentially ran the entire restaurant. He tried chatting with me about nonsense and got angry when I ignored him. Suddenly, he said, "I really want to go home and see my mom." "Are you gonna see your mom?" "Oh, right." And he laughed. My heart broke. "Screw you, Paul." "I won't come to your funeral," said my narcissistic bipolar mother 4 months after I was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. "God sent you a miscarriage because he knew you would be a terrible mother." A friend called to tell me she was pregnant. I congratulated her, said it was great, etc. She asked how my pregnancy was going. That morning, I had had a miscarriage, and I shared my pain with her. She replied, "Well, you didn't want the baby as much as I did. Good thing the miscarriage happened to you, not me." 16 years have passed, and I still haven't forgiven her. Sorry, but what the hell? Who in their right mind says that crap? Someone who shouldn't be raising a child. "Can't believe this university accepts trash like you," said my racist neighbor from across the street when she found out I got into a top 10 engineering school. That bitch called immigration on me and my family, and repeatedly called the police with ridiculous accusations. Why are you upset? The baby wasn't even born yet." An ex-friend said this after learning that my then-wife had a miscarriage at 6 months. After a decent, as I thought, intimate moment, the girl got off me, stared at the ceiling, and said, "I should probably become a prostitute because I sleep with people I don't respect at all." That relationship didn't last long. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and watch other videos.